Between Bahrain and China, Ferrari changed the angle of their front suspension wishbones, substantially, quietly, without a single official announcement. Nobody in the paddock flagged it, no team press release, no FIA technical document, just 2 photos, same car, 2 different races, and a geometry that simply does not match. That change didn't happen by accident, and the timing of it, right as Ferrari began showing genuine pace improvements, is not a coincidence that serious engineers are ignoring. Here's what nobody is connecting yet. That suspension geometry shift may be directly linked to Ferrari's confidence that they will receive the full 4% ADUO engine allocation after Miami. Not before it, after it, which means whatever they're building toward, it starts right now. If you want to be in the room when this gets confirmed, subscribe now, because this is where it starts. To understand why a suspension angle change matters this much, you need to know what Ferrari's problem actually was at the start of 2026. When the SF26 launched, the car had a specific aerodynamic signature. It was generating its downforce in a very particular way, heavily reliant on the floor and the rear diffuser interaction, with the front end designed to feed airflow in a predictable, efficient manner under the new 2026 regulations. On paper, it was elegant. In practice, in race conditions, in dirty air, it was fragile. The front suspension geometry in a modern F1 car is not just about how the wheel moves. It controls the attitude of the entire front of the car under braking, under load transfer, and critically, it dictates how consistently the front wing sits relative to the ground at speed. Change that angle, and you change the aerodynamic platform the entire car is built on. Ferrari came into Bahrain with one interpretation. They arrived in China with a different one, and neither Leclerc nor Hamilton said a single public word about it. That silence is interesting. Teams talk about upgrades. They announce them. They use them as marketing. This one they didn't, which suggests it wasn't planned as a public upgrade. It was a correction, an admission that something needed fixing faster than the scheduled upgrade cycle allowed. Everyone assumed Ferrari's pace issues in the opening rounds were purely engine related, a power deficit to Mercedes and McLaren that nothing aero could fully compensate for. But what the suspension data suggests is that Ferrari had an additional problem. The car was aerodynamically inconsistent, and the fix was faster than anyone expected. The first thing that caught my attention was the photo comparison that surfaced this week. 2 images, same car, different races. The upper and lower wishbone angles on the SF26 front suspension have changed measurably between the Bahrain preseason test and the China Friday practice session. What does this mean technically? The wishbone angle directly influences what engineers call the anti-dive geometry, how much the front of the car compresses under hard braking. Change that angle steeper, and the car brakes more stably, but with slightly less mechanical grip. Change it shallower, and you gain initial rotation, but risk instability under heavy aero load at high speed. Conservative interpretation. Ferrari adjusted the geometry to fine-tune balance after early season data showed the car was behaving differently on track than in simulation. Explosive interpretation. Ferrari found a fundamental mismatch between their 2026 floor concept and the front suspension they launched with. This wasn't a tweak, it was a structural recalibration of how the entire front of the car interacts with the ground. According to sources close to the Italian press who've been tracking the SF26 development, Leclerc was reportedly unhappy with front-end behavior in Bahrain in specific high-speed corners. Not in terms of overall pace, but in terms of predictability. The car was doing things at the limit that he couldn't fully anticipate. If Ferrari needed to correct the front suspension this early in the season, what does that say about the baseline they launched with? And how much performance are they still leaving on the table? But that geometry change is only part of the story, because the second piece of evidence connects to something happening at the back of the car entirely. The second thing worth examining carefully is the Macarena rear wing, but not for the reason most people are discussing it. Everyone's focused on the straight line drag reduction. The wing flexes at speed, reduces drag on straights, recovers downforce in corners. Clean concept. Ferrari ran it first. Red Bull have now built their own version, and within 3 races, every team on the grid will have a variant. But here's what's being missed. The Macarena wing only works as designed if the rear of the car is aerodynamically stable enough to let the wing cycle properly through its flex range. And that rear stability is directly connected to what's happening at the exhaust outlet, specifically the interaction between exhaust back pressure and the diffuser throat. Sources at the race flagged this week that Ferrari's rear exhaust arrangement on the SF26 appears to be generating downforce, not drag, through a specific feature behind the exhaust outlet. Tombasi and the FIA addressed this publicly and said it's not relevant to how engines are tested for performance parity, but that statement doesn't say it's not happening. It says it's not being penalized. Conservative interpretation: Ferrari found a passive aerodynamic benefit from their exhaust packaging that was unintentional but legal. Explosive interpretation: Ferrari engineered a blown diffuser adjacent effect deliberately, and the FIA's statement that it doesn't affect engine testing parameters was specifically worded to avoid confirming that the aero benefit itself is real. If that rear exhaust effect is real and legal, every team that hasn't figured it out yet is already at a disadvantage, and Ferrari has been running it since Bahrain, and this is where the two pieces of evidence start talking to each other, because a more stable front end, via the suspension correction, combined with a rear exhaust that's generating passive downforce, means Ferrari may have quietly assembled a car that's fundamentally more aerodynamically capable than what we've been watching in the first 4 races. The third piece of evidence is the driver feedback from the Monza filming day last week. According to Rosario Giuliano at Autora, both Leclerc and Hamilton described the upgraded package tested at Monza as, quote, globally promoted. That's an unusual phrase in motorsport journalism. It doesn't mean the drivers liked it. It means the evaluation was positive across every metric they were testing: balance, mechanical feel, aero platform behavior, and drivability in representative conditions. For context, filming days in Formula 1 are strictly limited to 100 kilometers of running on demonstration tires. Teams use them specifically for parts that they need real-world validation data on before committing to a race weekend. If you bring something to a filming day, you're serious about it. You're not experimenting, you're confirming. The fact that Ferrari brought their full Miami upgrade package to Monza on a filming day, rather than saving first-run data for a Friday practice session, tells you how confident their simulation data already was. They weren't testing to decide, they were testing to confirm. Conservative interpretation: Ferrari has a solid Miami upgrade that will narrow the gap to McLaren and maintain their current championship position. Explosive interpretation: Ferrari arrived at the Monza filming day already knowing the upgrades worked, because the suspension correction and exhaust interaction they've been running since China had already validated the concept in race conditions. Monza was the final sign-off before unlocking the engine conversation. And that last word, engine, is where this entire story has been pointing from the beginning. Here's the angle that almost no one is discussing publicly. Ferrari's engine chief Enrico Gualtieri stated this week that Ferrari are confident, not hopeful, confident, that they will receive both of their ADUO development permits this season and both permits again in 2027. 4 permits across 2 seasons, the full allocation. ADUO. The Asymmetric Development Unlock Order. What is the mechanism the FIA created for 2026 to allow power unit manufacturers who are behind the performance benchmark to develop and deploy upgrades outside the normal freeze window? In theory, it's a catch-up mechanism. In practice, it's a competitive weapon. The benchmark for 2026, based on current data, appears to be the Mercedes power unit. McLaren proved that in Japan when they extracted significantly more from the same engine than they had in the opening rounds. The Mercedes ICE is performing. Ferrari's is not yet, but here's what nobody is saying out loud. The ADUO allocation isn't confirmed until the FIA completes its post-Miami performance analysis. That analysis requires real race data, which means Ferrari's confidence that they will receive the allocation isn't based on a conversation they've had with the FIA. It's based on what their internal data is telling them about where they currently sit relative to the benchmark. If Ferrari's internal numbers show them far enough behind Mercedes on pure power unit performance, and the suspension correction plus exhaust interaction haven't been masking a larger deficit, then the ADUO allocation is essentially guaranteed. But if those aero improvements have been closing the gap artificially, making the Ferrari look more competitive than its engine actually is, then the FIA's post-Miami data could paint a different picture, one where Ferrari's engine deficit is bigger than their results suggest. If that's actually what's happening, then McLaren has a massive problem by the Monaco Grand Prix, because a Ferrari that receives the full 4% ADUO allocation and deploys it by June or July isn't just recovering lost ground. It's arriving at a moment when McLaren's own development curve may be plateauing, and Ferrari's is accelerating. Think about what that looks like in the championship standings. Ferrari currently behind in the constructors. Leclerc and Hamilton potentially both mathematically in the fight. A new engine allocation arriving mid-season, and an aerodynamic platform that, by the evidence we've just walked through, is performing better than anyone outside Maranello realized. That's not a comeback story, that's a takeover, and the teams who should be most concerned aren't talking about it publicly, which in Formula 1 usually means they're talking about it privately. Constantly. Let's zoom out and look at what this actually means for the rest of the 2026 season. Right now, the championship picture looks like a two-horse race between McLaren and Ferrari, with Red Bull lurking. Mercedes are producing the most powerful engine on the grid, but the car itself is not converting that into race wins consistently. That gap between power unit competitiveness and chassis performance is exactly the environment Ferrari is designed to exploit. Red Bull's position is the most interesting secondary story here. Red Bull have already built their own version of the Macarena wing. They've been testing it. If the Macarena concept is as beneficial as Ferrari believes, and as the Monza filming day data suggests, Red Bull adopting it means the field is converging around a technical concept that Ferrari pioneered. That's influence. And it means Ferrari's engineering direction is being validated by their most dangerous rival. Mercedes are watching the ADUO situation more closely than anyone. If Ferrari receives the full 4% allocation, the power unit gap closes significantly. Mercedes' advantage becomes purely chassis and software, areas where they've been inconsistent in 2026. Toto Wolff has already flagged concerns publicly about the ADUO parameters potentially favoring Ferrari. That's not a coincidence. That's a chess move. Building a public record of concern before a decision is made. McLaren are the team with the most to lose. They're the only constructor running the Mercedes engine while also having the strongest chassis on the grid right now. If Ferrari's engine improves to within 1 to 2% of the Mercedes benchmark, Norris and Piastri lose the one structural advantage they've had since Australia. The car will still be fast, but the margin will be gone. Here's the scenario I want you to think through. Miami confirms Ferrari's upgrade package works. The FIA completes its post-Miami performance analysis. Ferrari receives ADUO allocation confirmation in May. They deploy the first upgrade at the Spanish Grand Prix or Monaco. By the time F1 reaches Silverstone in July, Ferrari have a fundamentally different power unit and the aerodynamic base we've been discussing today to extract everything from it. At that point, McLaren needs a major update to respond. Red Bull need to decide whether to prioritize this season or next. And the championship, which looked like Norris's to lose in March, looks completely different. Now, here's a question I genuinely don't have a clean answer to, and I'd love to know what you think in the comments. Is Ferrari's ADUO confidence a sign that they genuinely have the best plan in the paddock right now? A team that intentionally built a chassis around an engine they knew would get the upgrade allocation? Or is it the most expensive gamble in modern F1 history, betting a title on a regulatory mechanism that has never been used at this scale before? Because both are possible, and the answer changes everything about how we should read this season. My bet is this: by the Monaco Grand Prix, we will have official confirmation of Ferrari's ADUO allocation status, and the number will be higher than 2%, probably the full 4%. And when that's announced, the coverage will frame it as breaking news. But everything we've talked about today will have been pointing toward it for weeks. The suspension correction in China, the exhaust interaction that the FIA carefully didn't deny, the Monza filming day with fully promoted driver feedback, Gualtieri's public confidence. None of these things happen in isolation in Formula 1. They're a sequence. I could be completely wrong about the exhaust interaction being intentional engineering rather than a happy accident, but I don't think I am, because Ferrari don't have happy accidents at this level. They have features that take time to become visible. The suspension story is the one that changes how you watch Miami this weekend. Watch the front end of the SF26 under braking, specifically at turn 1 and the chicane. Watch how settled it is compared to what we saw in Bahrain. If the correction worked the way the Monza data suggests it did, you'll see a different car. Not faster on the straight, faster where it counts. In the transitions, in the confidence the drivers show at the limit. That's the detail that separates a car that's quick in testing from a car that's quick when it matters, if you want to be in the room when the ADUO confirmation drops. And when we find out whether this was Ferrari's master plan or their most expensive miscalculation, subscribe now. This channel will be here when it happens.